Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 99. Whoa, the last of the double digits with Michael Close, and boy is it a great one. You not only learn about how you can get on Penn and Teller Fool Us, but you learn about really the important details of that, like how to have a good act, how to have a good act for TV, how to make a good presentation, what you're probably doing wrong in your act, what you can do better, and things like that from the guy who deserves to teach it. So this episode is action-packed, and I hope that you love it. Here it is, episode 99, the last of the double digits with Michael Close. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Discourse in Magic. My name is Jonah.
My name is Tyler.
And we are here with a very special guest, someone we've been trying to get on for a very long time. You know him from his Workers Project. You know him from his new ebook, Paradigm Shift. You know him from his work on Fool Us, and we're so excited to dive in. We are here in person with the Michael Close. How you doing today?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me on the program. I appreciate it.
Super pumped to have you and excited to dive in, talk magic theory, and talk loads of magic details. Let's start at the very beginning. How did you get into magic?
I was born in Cleveland, Ohio, and when I was about 3 or 4, my family moved to Fort Wayne, Indiana, which is in the northeast corner of Indiana, which is in the Midwest. There was a magic shop there run by a guy named Dick Stoner, and it was a magic shop that had been in his family for a long time. His father owned the shop before he did. It's probably one of the oldest single-family owned magic shops in the United States. It's been around for a long time. Dick is still around. He's almost 90 years old, wow, I think, and still moving around. He was at the IBM SAM Combined Convention in Louisville, so I'm scooting around. Anyway, I'm pretty sure, and I don't remember exactly how old I was. I was probably maybe 5 years old. And I got a Sneaky Pete magic kit, which was just a kid's set, but pretty cool. And that sort of got me interested. And I do know when I was 6 that we went to Stoner's magic shop and I picked out 2 tricks. And I still remember the 2 tricks that I got then. I think I still have one of them. One of them, I'm pretty sure I still have the little block that changes the penny into the dime. I know I still have that trick in one of my little boxes of magic crap. One thing that was great about Dick, he was the perfect magic dealer because he never sold me anything that was beyond my ability to learn it. So that was very good. And at the beginning, I sort of did what all kids do. You buy a couple of tricks and you take them home and you learn them. And then you go back and you buy a few more tricks and you see a trick and you don't buy it and you spend 3 weeks until the next time when you get another one trying to figure out how it works. But it was through Dick that I really decided that the most efficient way to spend my money was to buy books because we didn't have a lot of money. And it seemed to me that if I could buy a prop for $10 or I could buy a book that gave me 60 tricks for $10, it would certainly be the way to go, especially since playing cards, at least back then, were an inexpensive prop. Right. Not anymore, of course. But so that's what happened. I got interested that way. Dick was a huge influence on my performing style because he's a very funny guy. Yeah. And I really was impressed with the fact that he could get laughs while he performed. He performed actually, I think, for my kindergarten class or my 6th grade class. And I still remember what he did. He did Hippity Hop Rabbits, which was the first trick one of the first tricks I saw that just fooled the crap out of me. He did that, but I remember it vividly watching him work. And so he was a big influence on how the only bad advice he ever gave me through the years was I was going to pick up a copy of Erdnase, and he said, "Oh, you don't want that." And okay, so I took his advice, but changed my mind later on. So we were there until just before I started grade 6. See how Canadian I've become?
I like it.
Grade 6. Anyway, and we moved away from Fort Wayne, and we moved to the middle of the state of Indiana, very near the Indianapolis, which is the capital of Indiana. And that pretty much isolated me from magicians for a long time. Just about from the time I was 6 till, maybe 18 or 19.
Wow.
Everything I did on my own.
Mm-hmm. And were you like getting new books and stuff at the time?
Exactly, yeah. So what I would do is every month or every 2 months or whatever, 3 months, I'd order a new book from Dick and study it. But I did almost all of it on my own.
Wow.
In fact, it wasn't until 1972, so it was in the summer, so I would have been 19 years old, hadn't turned 20 yet. And my family and I drove out from Indiana to Los Angeles to visit my aunt and uncle. And I wanted to get into the Magic Castle. I really wanted to get into the Magic Castle. So my cousin, who was 20 years old and I was 19, we tried to get in on a Saturday night. And we couldn't get in because you can't get in through the week in the evening if you're under 21. Interestingly, it was Clark the Senator Crandall, who came out through the door that opens up there at the castle and told us, and he was very apologetic. He says, "I'm sorry, I know you've come a long way, but I can't let you in. You're going to have to come back tomorrow on Sunday when minors can be in the castle."
Right.
Well, I was heartbroken because I knew there wasn't going to be a single good human being doing magic in the Magic Castle on a Sunday when the kids could come in. So I went back. My cousin didn't want to go back. He had other things to do. So I went back and actually sat in the castle, one of the round tables. If you walk in the castle and face the main bar and turn to your left, that's where you walk through to get in line for the close-up gallery. There used to be 2 round tables there many years ago. And so I just sat there waiting for something to happen. And Di Vernon and Francis Carlyle walked in and sat down at the table with me. And I never talked to him, never said a word to him. I watched Vernon do a few things. And there's more stories about that, but I won't go into it. But Mike Perovich wrote a book called The Vernon Companion, and I contributed the story of my meeting Vernon at this table. But anyway, one of the offshoots of that visit to California was I discovered Genie Magazine, which I didn't know existed.
Yeah.
So I got a subscription to Genie Magazine, and in the back of Genie Magazine was an ad for the Society of American Magicians. And I found out that there was an assembly in Indianapolis, which is about 30 minutes from where we lived. And through that, I met a guy named Forrest Sample, who was a past president of the SAM. He's long gone. And I met the guys who were in the Magic Club. Now, at this point in time, I was 19, and I could do some stuff. I could do just about everything that a guy could do who only had books as his source of doing stuff. But I'd figured out how to do Pharaoh shuffles. I actually learned the Pharaoh shuffle from Harry Lorraine's Close-Up Card Magic, which is an impossible book to learn how to do a Pharaoh shuffle from. Anyway.
And now you're the guy.
Well, it's just, we can talk about that if you'd like to a little bit down the road.
Yeah, we'll get there. For sure.
Good. Because there's a story behind that as well. But anyway, so I was doing stuff for these guys in the local Magic Club, and they said, "Wow, you're good with a deck of cards. You should meet Harry Reiser." And I said, "Reiser?" I said, "Isn't he in Chicago?" Because I knew who Harry Reiser was, but I always associated him with Ed Marlowe and the guys in Chicago. And he said, "Oh, no, he used to live in Chicago, but he lives in Indianapolis now." So I was going to music school in Indianapolis at the time, a little music, Jordan College of Music, part of Butler University. And I called Harry up and told him who I was. And he didn't live that far from the apartment I was in, which was near the music school. So I went over there and met him, and he bashed my brains in seriously, really seriously. And we hung out for years after that. I mean, he was truly my mentor. It was a very informal relationship. It wasn't like, now go home and practice this and come back and show me how you've done. It was simply a situation of I would come in with questions or we'd talk about things. And he turned my head around as far as magic was concerned, because nothing that I knew, he didn't look like he was doing any of the moves that I knew. Right. And that was one of the lessons, that there are better ways to do things, but it's possibly not in the books that you've been reading.
Right.
Yeah. And from there, my careers, in terms of making a living, my degrees are in music. So I've either made my living as a musician or a magician. If I had just gone for that degree in Sanskrit, I could have had the trifecta of unemployment.
The big three.
The big three of unemployment. So what happened was I just went wherever the work was.
Yeah.
And I did my first restaurant in 1978. It was a place called Max and Irma's. And they had a long tradition of doing magic. A fellow named Steve Scomp had been the magician there. He'd worked there for several years, and he was relocating. He was into television production, and he was moving out to the West Coast and wanted to know if I wanted to take over the magic gig. Now, I thought about this for a long time before I said yes. And the reason is that if you love music and you love to play, right, and you decide you're going to make your living from music, it changes how much you love music. You won't love it the same way. You won't love it the same way because people are going to keep asking for Proud Mary, and you're going to tell them to stick it in there. Yeah. And you can't, because your job is to do what your job is to do. Exactly. And I didn't want magic to become that. I didn't want to have to think about developing material that's going to work. If I wanted a trick where you had to stand on your left foot and close one eye and stand in a line to make this look good, that's what I wanted to do. But I said yes. And it was a valuable thing because for a lot of guys who have magic as a hobby, the very first thing they learn on the very first day they go to work in a restaurant as a close-up magician is that nothing they have in their repertoires works.
Yeah, for sure.
None of it works. And this happens with everybody because you just don't understand the restrictions that the venue puts on the material. So I worked that gig from 1978 to 1984 for 6 years. And I stopped because, number one, I was getting tired of it. And number two, my music work was getting really busy. I was the first or second keyboard player for studio work in Indianapolis. And I played on lots of stuff. All the Disney on Ice recorded music that they use for those shows, it's all done in Indianapolis.
Wow.
Yeah, a lot of it. And the reason is that between the Indianapolis Symphony Orchestra, which is a fine orchestra, and Indiana University, which is down in Bloomington, Indiana, in the south part of Indiana, there are great musicians there, and they work far less expensively than musicians in Chicago or New York or LA.
Right.
So they recorded a lot of stuff there. There's also a fellow named Bill Gaither, who is a gospel music singer. And I did a lot of work at his studio for all kinds of things. And I had a jazz trio and did all this kind of stuff. So basically, I just stopped doing magic for about 4 years, from about 1944 to 1988.
And you switched over to music.
Well, I didn't switch. I just decided not to do both. I decided to give myself a break because magic can actually burn you out if you're not careful. It can really burn you out.
For sure.
And it's good to put it aside every now and then. And actually, until like 1990, there was always time in my life when I just put it aside and didn't think about it. But I haven't done that now for 27, 28 years. Once I started to put the workers' books out, then I'm in it big time, and I've never put it aside. So anyway, then in 1988, a restaurant called Illusions opened up in Carmel, Indiana, which is a northern suburb of Indianapolis. And I actually lived in that community. And at the time, a fellow named Chris Moore, who actually brought the concept up from Florida, he had a place called the Magic Moment in, now I'm not going to remember. It's not Jacksonville, I don't think, but it might be. Anyway, Paul Cummins, the great Paul Cummins, worked down there with Chris. Anyway, he brought the idea to start a restaurant in the city of Carmel, Indiana. And a fellow named Carl Andrews, who now lives in Florida. A lot of people know Carl as close-up magician. Were the first two magic guys there. And they said to me, do you want to come work in this place? I said, I don't know. I really don't know. I've been out of it for 4 years. I haven't really missed it.
Yeah.
But, okay. I guess. Fine. So, and it was really fun, and I really enjoyed it. And after about 3 months, Carl left, and they made me the supervisor of the magic staff.
Oh, wow.
And I was there for 5 years, and then it was time for me to leave. Things got horribly strange in that place. It got completely sideways.
I feel like there's some good stories there that we don't have time for.
You know, what basically had happened was it just they lost focus, and the guy, the money guy, thought he was Neil Diamond, and thought that really what we should be doing in the lounge of the bar where we used to do stand-up shows, he thought he should be singing. And it just diluted the whole thing, and I really didn't need to be there anymore. But I will tell you, the interesting thing about the Illusions years is that the stuff that came out of those 5 years are the tricks that magicians are still dealing with. So just about all the worker stuff from those 5 books came from those 5 years, and a few things from my earlier Max and Irma's experience. But Chris Kenner was part of that. Homer Leewag was part of that.
Oh, wow.
All the Sybil stuff that Kenner sort of took all around the country. You know, it wasn't, I mean, Sybil wasn't his, but I mean, he was certainly the catalyst that spread that to a lot of people. Exactly right. And the same thing with what's now called Three Fly.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a time when Kenner and a couple of guys, they went off to something in New York, and Kenner comes back, and all of a sudden here's this coin trick that nobody's seen before.
Wow.
And what revolutionized it was the fact that one of the great discoveries that people made when they worked at Illusions was, if you're working a 2-top, which means 2 people at a table, or a 4-top, 4 people at a table, you can do your standard close-up stuff, which normally means you're doing it flat on the table.
Right.
The minute you're working for a table of, say, 6 people, 3 on a side, and it's long and you're at the end, exactly. The magic has to come off the tabletop and come up chest high. And then you can do a close-up trick for 6 people, 12 people, a room full of people. Right. And that was the great breakthrough that happened from that. And guys are still playing with this stuff. They haven't gotten beyond that yet, which is extraordinary to me. Hasn't moved beyond it. So for all its craziness, Illusions was a really fine place to be for several reasons. You worked real hard. The restaurant seated 150 people. We turned it 3 times on a Friday and Saturday night. Every table got magic. So on a Friday or Saturday, I would get there about 4:30 in the afternoon, and I'd do my first table sometimes before 5:30.
Right.
I'd do 2.
And there's one magician doing the whole room?
Oh, no. Oh, we had 8 guys, 7 or 8 guys. Yeah, 7 or 8 guys. It's the first time I've ever been in an experience where other magicians were also working at the same place.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you something that came from that. But so the stamina that you develop from working something like that is, so you'd work from 4:30 in the afternoon till 1 in the morning doing tables. And when you weren't doing tables, I did 2 stand-up shows alternating we do 4 stand-up shows in the bar, and I do 2, and another guy would do 2. So you really
packed nights of magic.
Yeah, especially on the weekends. But the great thing about it is if you walked in with something, thought, I wonder if this will play on a Monday, by Saturday, you figured out if it was either going to work or it wasn't going to work.
Make it work.
And because we had such talented guys there, not just Homer and Kenner, but guys like Mark Brandeberry from Lafayette, Indiana, really smart magicians, good guys, that you were able to bounce ideas off of them. And, they'd offer suggestions and directions, and you could really work things out. But the one thing I learned in the restaurant that most magicians never, ever get the opportunity to learn is just how little they are fooling the people that they think they are fooling. Because people are polite. For the most part, they're not going to tell you how your trick works while you're standing there. They're going to tell each other when you leave, after you leave.
For sure.
And so you'd walk up to a table, and the people, to my right would be
discussing how the last
guy did it.
Yeah.
Exactly right. And so that's something you don't know. So anyway, I did that for 5 years, and I put out the workers' books from 1990 to 1996. In 98, I moved to Las Vegas and started to work there. I worked at a place called the Houdini Lounge, which was in Lance Burton's, which was in the Monte Carlo Hotel. And that was really a fun gig for me because I could play piano and do magic.
Wow.
So I never took a break. And I had a really fun table tent that said, if you'd like to request a song, ask the magician. And if you'd like to see some magic, talk to the piano player.
I love that.
So that was really a great experience. From the repertoire that I developed in that place, that's in an ebook called Closely Guarded Secrets. And then by this time, I was traveling around doing lots of lectures, lots of conventions. Yeah. I did 60 lectures in 90 days in 1998, Whoa. Driving around with my wife, Lisa. We drove all over the United States and Canada. I've been, around the world doing magic conventions and things like that there. And then in 2009, or the end of 2008, I became the editor of MUM.
Yeah.
And I did that for 9 years and just wrapped that up at the end of last year. And so now I'm sort of at retirement age and freelancing again, which of course is easily the stupidest move that anybody could possibly do. But I'm happy about it because number one, with these ebooks, they've been on the back burner for almost a decade, and there simply wasn't the time or the energy to get them done. Yeah. So between the middle of November and now, we've been doing nothing but concentrating on that. So that all got done.
Yeah, I mean,
and that's how I got here.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very, I don't know how the right way to phrase it. I don't want to say extensive. It's a thought out answer to that question. Like the important steps.
And surprisingly, I don't believe there's a true thing in any of it. So being able to lie like that,
ask me again, I'll make it all a different
exactly
story.
Right. Stolen by gypsies.
But yeah, I really like the transition from, have a small interest to a hobbyist to a worker to now a teacher, which I think is, not that you're only a teacher, but I mean, it's definitely sort of the title that I associate you with.
Okay.
And I guess that's more so because I'm a, younger person who's only seen your works in books and in, at camp and stuff.
Well, yeah, I mean, the big change in my personal life came in 2007 when my wife and I adopted a little girl from Guatemala. Mm-hmm. She was 4 months old when we adopted her. She's 11 now. And since I'm an old father, I consciously made the decision that I would really be home as much as I could possibly be home. So that's one reason why the editor gig was a good one, because I could do it at home. I didn't have to be on the road. Yeah. Consequently, that sort of took me out of a lot of performing and a lot of magic conventions. There was a very funny thing in the blurb for the session, the convention in London earlier in January. In describing me, it said that Michael Close had been away from the magic community for almost a decade. And I thought, that's about the most perfect way to describe working for the Society of American Magicians that I could ever say. Yes, amazing. I have been away from the magic community. So now I'm getting back into it. I want to perform more. I want to be as helpful as I can. I think that if I'm being referred to as a teacher, that's fine. I've tried with all the things I've published to make those as if a teacher were explaining things to you. So I have no problem with that.
And, I think that no matter what your actual profession is, I think there's something to be said for trying to live your life like a teacher and educate as you go on and just, help grow people with whatever knowledge you have, whether it's magic related or whatever it is you do at home. If you're not a magician listening to this, I don't know why you are, but
well, the flip side of that is I think it's almost more valuable to live your life as a student.
Right.
For sure.
And the minute you run into somebody who says, I've got it all figured out, then at that point I'm saying, I'm not sure you've got anything to tell me. For a while, I taught college when I was getting my master's degree in music. I used to teach music theory classes and things like that, some jazz classes. And the one thing I never wanted what I always wanted was to be challenged.
Right. Even as a teacher.
I want to be challenged. Yeah. Of course. What I wanted was somebody to come up to me after I had spoken and to come up to me, either later that day or the next day or whatever, and go, Mr. Close, I was thinking about what you said, and I'm pretty sure you're full of shit.
Yeah.
And then I could go, dream. And then I would go, tell me why.
Yeah.
And then we could talk about it. And sadly, mostly what I got was, is this going to be on the final? And that's what you get. And that's not what you want. That's not what you want.
So on the note of teacher, you've helped a lot of magicians make their act and performances better, not only on Fool Us, but I know you're doing some workshops around town. So obviously you need to see what someone's doing in order to help them with that. But just bare bones, what do most people get wrong? You see a lot of repeated errors. What do most people get wrong in a performance, in them putting their trick together, their show together? What's everyone getting wrong?
Well, so you basically want me to put myself out of business over the internet here. Well, there's several areas. There's several areas where there's problems. The first area and the easiest area to think about is most presentations that I watch are terrible. They're simply terrible because there is no reason for me to watch them. Right. I'm not engaged. I'm not being offered anything other than a puzzle.
Right.
Or someone saying, whether overtly or not, look what I can do.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, but look what I can do is not a satisfying
presentation.
Yeah,
it's not
enough.
Now
it works. It works great for juggling.
Yeah,
it works great for acrobats.
Yeah.
It works great for people who actually have a skill.
But when you're faking to have the skill,
but even musicians, that is not the message that musicians convey for the most part. Sometimes you get a little of that, but nobody plays an instrument to say, look what I can play.
Right.
That kind of noise usually happens. The artist will come in, play their concerto with the orchestra, called back for an encore, and now they do look what I can do.
Right.
And they play some, you get one,
yeah.
and you do some
There's
flashy
a guitar solo
show off
in the middle of something.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's like it's like in the Schmenke Brothers, in the last polka, when the tuba player plays his solo and everybody else walks off.
Right.
Yeah.
So finding some type of evocative presentation that gives me a reason to care.
Right.
I want to know, why should I care about this? Now, there's ways to solve that problem, but that's one. The other is most magicians never write a script.
Yeah.
They never actually write down. And to be honest, this is one of the things that gets brought up and requested from the Fool Us producers over and over. Send us your script.
Right.
Because then they can start to work and get at the heart of the matter and figure out what has to be fixed. So most magicians don't like to do it, but you've got to do it. And then, of course, I hear, well, I want to sound spontaneous. Well,
have you ever watched a movie?
Yeah.
But it's not only that, but spontaneity needs a tether. You can't go off in the stratosphere if you're not tethered to what you're going to come back to and talk about.
Paint whatever you want, but you need a canvas there to put it on.
Exactly.
Right?
You have to start somewhere. So that's one thing. Another thing is, I don't think a lot of magicians even understand what an effect is.
Yeah.
Because you get to the end of it and you say,
what happened?
What happened? What was the effect?
Yeah.
And often this comes about because you're trying to jam several effects together. I mean, there have been some Fool Us audition videos I've watched. There were a couple that I remember, and I got to the end of it, and I had no idea what the effect was supposed to be. I had to go back and watch it again. So once you can identify what your effect is, the next thing you have to be able to do is to make sure that I can understand what the initial conditions are
and what the final condition
the final condition is, and to understand that nothing that happens between these should allow that last thing to happen. And that's important too. Important too. So there are the kinds of things that we talk about.
Sure.
There are times when There are things that I can fix or try to fix. There are things that I'm unable to fix. Sometimes a trick is actually flawed from the get-go.
In the nature of
the structure of it is flawed in such a way that I can't go back and figure out a way to do it. So, my job, though, as one of the two Fool Us consultants, is I am at the bidding of the network and the producers.
Right.
The network has the final say. The producers are beholden to the network because they're cutting the checks.
Right. Yeah.
So if the networks say, we like this guy because that guy fits a demographic that they need to fill, and that guy's not a very good magician, then I have to do whatever I can do to polish that person up enough to be presentable on television. Sometimes it'll be fine. Sometimes, there it is. Yeah. But you can't fix it. I think so. Those are the things that come back over and over again.
Yeah. And it's something we hear again and again on this podcast is like so many people dismiss scripting or they make excuses like as if it's going to harm their act. But like the worst thing you can do is try it and see what it does. And I tried it once, and since then scripting has been my first step as soon as I know what I want to put out there.
People have asked me what my process is. There are two.
What's your process?
See how that happens? There's. I haven't read the second book, but Pete McCabe's first book on scripting magic. Yeah. I'm in that. He and I had a nice long interview years ago when Lisa and I were out in California, and he asked me what my process was. Now I am fluent at extemporaneous speaking. I can get up and talk, and as long as I know what it is I'm going to talk about, I can just go. And I can do the same thing with a magic trick. I can come up with something and be fluent in my presentation. But what I always do, if I'm not writing down every word I'm going to say, is I answer that question. What does this trick mean to me? Yeah. Right. Why is this important to me? What does it say? What does it point to in the bigger world? Is this something beyond itself? So I try to answer that question. And then I look at the trick and I say, where in this effect must I say something? Right. Where in this trick does the patter serve? The patter only has 4 purposes. Patter either entertains, instructs, misdirects. There's one I'm forgetting, but there's 4. The problem,
you have to pay for the 4th.
You have to pay for the 4th.
It's behind the paywall.
It's in one of the workers' books that I'm blanking on it now. Or to misdirect or something else. To emphasize. Okay. So I'm either using my patter to entertain you through my presentation, or I'm telling you what you need to do as far as putting cards on the table, or I'm saying, look, the deck is face up and face down, and you can see it is. Or I'm saying, hey, is that the Goodyear blimp? And as you turn to look at it, I flop the deck. Right. So but patter that tells people what they are seeing. Okay, now I'm going to put this coin. Well, that I can see that. Yeah. That isn't helpful. So I look for the places where the patter has to be misdirective. Where do I need to say something? What must I emphasize to make sure the effect is clear? And those I script. I actually write those down. Right. And I have those in my head. And that's how I script things.
That's beautiful. So I want to dive in very quickly about almost the this is the hook for the people at home, but how does one get on Penn and Teller Fool Us? And I don't necessarily mean that we know there's an email address, that's not, but what should someone do if they're the lucky few to listen to this episode and they've been trying to get on? What's the secret in order to, when you watch it, you're going to say this guy?
Okay. So here's what you have to do. Assuming that this is in February, you need a time machine.
Is that when it's submitted?
No.
Right.
We are at the time of this recording, which is the end of January. We are deep into the casting
and
the hiring
for next season.
Well, if there is,
yeah.
I never make any promises
for sure
about that. I never make any promises.
Will you do it on this podcast?
If we're up to me, I could certainly talk about it. But it is so far beyond my pay grade to make any decisions about that. Well, here's what needs to be done. You need an interesting effect. You need an interesting presentation. Here's what I tell people. You should design whatever effect you're going to pitch to be on this show and ask yourself, what are the 5 seconds that the network could cut out of my presentation and put on their 30-second promo so people would go, holy crap, what's that guy doing?
I have to see that.
I have to see that.
Yeah.
Now, if there isn't one in your show, in your act, in whatever trick you're pitching, you will have a harder time getting on the show. If you're doing a card trick, you'll have a harder time getting on the show, simply because we're top heavy with card tricks.
For sure.
It's just the way it is. And it's a variety show.
Yeah.
I mean, this is one of the, there's so many things you have to think about when you think about what goes into putting something like this on television. If it were just magicians watching, all we do is have guys looking at their cards and doing beautiful strip out shuffles. But that isn't what it is.
Yeah.
Think about when you are preparing what you're preparing. The problem that television has, or that I should say the problem that television presents to a performer trying to get on television, that is different from working in a restaurant or even doing stand-up in a club or something like that, is this. The restaurant audience, the bar magic audience, the audience when you're doing stand-up is captive for the most part. They cannot easily get up and leave if whatever you're doing bores them. This is not the case with television.
Right.
The ability to leave the room with your TV remote is instantaneous and only a reach away.
Yeah, almost effortless.
To just change the channel is nothing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there are times when, in my evaluation of acts for Fool Us, where I write, all I see are people changing the channel.
Right.
So if your act is front-loaded with procedure or front-loaded with patter, whatever it is, you have to get to it on television. Sad, but you have to, because you are fighting their ability to leave. So that's important too. That will help. If you have an interesting persona, an interesting look, and that's definable, that's good too.
Yeah.
We see, especially this season, I've seen, I must have seen several hundred by now that I've had to write analyses. What basically happens is the producers make their initial weeding out of the videos that come in. They look at them first and decide, and sometimes the network gets involved in that. And then they send them to Johnny Thompson and I, and we make our notes on every single act. And basically, the kinds of things I look for are, first of all, the question is, did it fool me?
Right.
And there were a handful out of them that I'm not exactly sure how things work.
Yeah.
And that's great. That's great. I don't know everything. And that's really great. Sometimes I look for things that are going to need to be fixed one way or another. So I'm prepared for that. Sometimes there are people that I think are not really TV worthy.
Yeah.
But it's important for everyone to listening to this to remember that that is not the magic consultant's job.
Right.
We do not decide who makes it onto TV or not. Our job is to do the best we can to prepare those who are chosen to go on television.
Yeah.
That's our job. And then the producers and the network make their decisions. We record. So get this schedule. I'm in Vegas for about 2 weeks. During that 2 weeks, we have 6.5 shooting days.
Whoa.
So I'm there for a few days. Then we shoot, I will call it an episode. what an episode means is that we will bring in an audience between 500 and 1,000 people, and we will shoot 5 or 6 magicians and a Penn and Teller spot. Mm-hmm. Okay? And that will be our first day of shooting. Now, we are not putting together a variety show for the audience who's watching the taping.
Right.
Because people show up in Vegas to tape their spots according to whatever their schedule is. So sadly, you may be in the audience and watch 7 guys do card tricks.
Right.
There's no way around that. Or you may see 6 mentalists or whatever. It's just whenever people are there. The show is modular. It's put together modularly. This is why everybody wears the same clothes every show.
Right.
The hilarious thing about this is that when Jonathan Ross, now understand, I was not part of the first season, which was recorded in England.
Yeah.
That was Johnny Thompson and a fellow named Paul Stone. But I did join the show when the first year we did it in Vegas, when Jonathan Ross came over from England and was the host. Well, Jonathan Ross wore the same black suit.
Yeah.
Penn and Teller wore the same 2 suits on every single show. Nobody said boo.
Right.
The host becomes Allison Hannigan. She has to wear the same outfit every show. And now people are going, why does she wear the same outfit every show? Oh, let me explain why. It's because you're a sexist pig. That's why. That's why. Because you hold women to a standard that men do not need to be held to. That's why she's doing that, idiots. So, I
mean, I don't want to get into that too much, but I'm just and I hate to generalize, but I'm very happy to hear what I will call, what do we refer to them as? The old heads of magic.
Like old guard.
Old guard. Like, you've been around a lot longer than us. And I am so happy to hear a forward-thinking person in that demographic, because you deal with so much nonsense in people's acts and in their personalities too, right?
Yeah. So anyway, getting back to the process. So we do that. We get 1 taping under our belts just to make sure everything goes well.
Yeah.
Then we do 2 more days of 2 shows a day. One in the early afternoon, one in the evening.
Okay. Wow.
Then the theater goes dark for 2 days. It's a union break. But I don't get a break because the whole time that this is going on, we are rehearsing acts.
For the next batch.
Mm-hmm. And then we do 4 days shooting 2 shows a day. So we do 8.
Crazy.
And so you do a season in like a week and a half, 2 weeks.
In 2 weeks, in 6.5 days of shooting, we record enough material for 13 episodes.
Wow.
We record 62 magicians and 13 Penn and Teller hunks.
And how many?
52.
How many magicians don't make the
10
cut? Yeah?
10. 4 on a show. So that's 52.
Okay.
52. 13 weeks, 4 magicians, 13 Penn and Teller hunks.
Wow.
And the determination of who makes the cut and who doesn't, there's several things.
Yeah.
Sometimes an act just doesn't come off the way we hoped it would. There's been some really good guys who didn't make air, not through any fault of their own.
Yeah.
Sometimes we just weren't able to capture the act on video as
or
we
it doesn't
would have
fit
liked.
With the episode.
Something happened.
Yeah.
Sometimes acts crash and burn spectacularly, and they don't make it.
Yeah.
Having
and how much of a hand do you have in making the performance great from seeing it on a video to helping them? Like, how much does an act change going through your...
Substantially.
Yeah.
Maddie Gilbert had never thought, or is it Maddie Gilbert now?
Yeah, Maddie Gilbert.
Now it's Maddie Gilbert. All right. Well, I knew him. I knew him when Maddie Gilbert. I knew him when that T wasn't silent. Anyway, good old Maddie. He came in, and we spent. He came in early in the shoot. The season he was on, it had never occurred to him to use the Tamariz interlacing the fingers thing with his oil and water routine. Now, of course, it wouldn't, because he doesn't have fingers to interlace.
Right.
But my point was to him, And I told him to do it. I said, have the people helping you interlace their fingers. Now that transformed that performance.
For sure.
There was not a dry eye in the entire theater when he did that. It was emotional beyond belief. So I would say I had a lot of on that.
Right.
Sometimes, sometimes
you're just brushing up some things.
Sometimes my help is very little. A guy like Eric Mead comes on. He's got it nailed. He doesn't need help from me.
Right. Yeah.
Sometimes a guy comes in like Paul Gertner, and we're talking about, he's going to do a trick on TV that requires 4 perfect Pharaoh shuffles, or 5, or however many he has to do for that handling of unshuffled. The Pharaoh shuffle can be a risky move if you're going to be prone to shaking.
Right.
And the reason is because your arms and your hands are away from your body and nothing's providing any support.
You're not doing it like this.
Well, you can't, you're not doing it up against your chest. And if you're going to flutter, well, there's nothing to stop that because your hands are out there. So we fixed that because we had a table that was high enough that he could lean forward and get his forearms, not his elbows, but his forearms against the edge of the table, and it steadied him substantially. Right. And so there's the thing. There are some acts that we substantially change, And, and that's my job. That's what I do. I designed, did you see Adam Wilbur?
Yes.
With the money trick? The whole sequence that he did was of my design.
Oh, wow.
Because he had this really fine idea of, I don't know exactly where this is from. He mentioned somebody else on Facebook that I wasn't aware of. But this ability to have a signature that could go from one bill to another bill.
Yes. Yeah.
And he was doing it for a trick that I thought was not particularly an effective way to use it, simply because it ran head on into the 2 perfect theory.
Right. Okay.
Which was, if you use it this way, you go, well, he must have been able to transfer that signature from one bill to another. And it collapses under its weight too quickly. So the constraints of that trick is that it takes some time to do everything that needs to be done so that process is complete. When he does it in a show, he's got 40 minutes between the time he borrows a bill to the time he uses it in the trick that he uses it in. We had 5.
Right.
So the question is, what do you design that allows you to go in and out of your briefcase, ties in with the theme of money, and still lets that all happen? So I said, well, why don't we use the slum magic tricks?
Yeah.
And we'll just build it all up. Because if we do it that way, the change from the 1 to the 100 is going to come out of nowhere, as will all of a sudden the signatures on it, and then you can give it away. Yeah. So that's the kind of thing sometimes we design. The producers in the network like this idea, but now we have to figure out a way to do it. So my participation is substantial. Wow. It is substantial.
Wow.
Yeah, it's so cool that, I'm sure when you were a kid, what are you going to do as a magician? You know what I mean? Like birthday parties your whole life. And then, not only did you make a living actually doing performing, but there is so many different avenues within magic for you to find a career, right?
Well, I guess if you call it a career, like a paid hobby. I wanted to be a surgeon. I wanted to be but my folks wanted me to do magic. So, I did it for them. I did it for them. I mean, it's just crazy the way it worked out. But, I'm a firm believer, and I don't know how much of this happens now. I grew up, my young man years from when I was, my late teens to maybe 30 years old, all happened before the internet was even feasible. I got my first home computer in 1985. I got an Apple IIe, but it had no internet stuff. The only reason I bought it is that it interfaced with a synthesizer I had, and I could store my library of sounds on it. I had an old Yamaha.
Did it still run DOS back then?
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
cool. Sure. Well, that Apple IIe was the first and last computer I owned that I knew everything about.
Right.
I could do assembly language programming on it. I could crack disks, which I did, but only so that I would have a backup.
Right.
I mean, I had this program that cataloged the sounds of the DX7 because it only held 32 sounds internally.
Right.
And there were thousands of sounds being created, for this instrument because it was so cool at the time. That bell-like electric piano sound that you hear in all that music from the early 80s, early to late 80s, that's all DX7 stuff. Anyway,
we can nerd about
we were talking about but what I'm saying is that if you wanted to learn something, if you really wanted to get better, you had to find somebody older than you were who knew more than you did and hope that they would tell you something. I mean, the first time I met Harry Reiser, we spent an evening together and he did basically the same trick over and over again. I shuffled up a deck of cards, I cut off a bunch, looked at the one I'd cut to, and buried it in the middle of the others, and then maybe shuffled or did something, and he found it over and over and over and over again, and never told me how any of it worked. And, you couldn't really walk up to a guy and say, could you tell me how this worked? Because they may or may not tell you. They may clam up.
Yeah.
And now with so many other sources of information available just with a click, I don't know that I'm not going to generalize because maybe it's not true, but I wonder if young magicians still value the information that can really only be received from an older, more experienced magician.
Right.
You cannot be critiqued. You cannot be, with somebody at your same skill level. You need somebody nobody. If I want to learn to play guitar, I'm not going to take lessons from somebody who knows as much as I know.
Right.
Yeah.
That's not going to do me any good. It doesn't do me any good. And what happens is, my eyes are different than other people's eyes.
Right.
Because I've seen more and I know what I'm looking for.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a real valuable thing to go make the effort to do that. Sometimes, you're able to get a situation where you can meet and doesn't cost you anything. Sometimes you're going to have to pay a little dough, but geez, you're going to throw that money away on a one-trick DVD a 1,000 times over and not get the information that you need to get.
Yeah.
So I think it's a valuable thing to do that. I'm happy that I was able to, to provide that service. I tell people that the one thing I got from my time with Harry Reiser is I developed perfect pitch for magic tricks.
Right.
And that I can see something and the out of tune thing happens and it's like a sour note or an out of tune note on a piano. I just immediately see it. Now I may not immediately have a fix, but I certainly can see where the problems are.
Right.
And so then the only situation is, one of the things that has come about with my work with Penn and Teller, because I've worked with them once, just about right after I moved to Las Vegas in 1998, I was working with them. They are perfect to work with because the only question they are asking is, how do we make this better?
Right.
If when we used to put a new piece up on the stage, Johnny Thompson and I would be in all over the theater watching from every angle. Mm-hmm. And if one of us said, that flashes from over here, they didn't say, no, it didn't.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, laymen never see that. That isn't what they say. They go, how do we fix that?
Yeah.
Okay, how do we fix it?
You have to be receptive.
And that's a difficult thing for some guys.
Yeah.
A lot of times.
Particularly magicians.
Well, it is because you have to understand that it is not a criticism of you as a person. It's trying to help. And I've had a couple guys who've come over and, decided they wanted to take some lessons with me. And when we hit that first, I don't like this at all.
Yeah.
You don't? I got to go think about that for a while.
Right.
You understand?
And obviously it's hard to know that something you've been working on for a long time doesn't work or there's a problem with it, right? But that's the case to make something amazing. Right?
The other great lesson I learned from Harry is that sometimes the only answer to the problem is, let's find a different trick.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It just can't be solved. Mm-hmm. It just can't be solved.
There's there's a lot to be said for, I don't want to use the word mentorship because I see a lot of magicians, they like try sort of develop this. I don't know. They put a lot of, they commit too much. I think that there's a balance that needs to be found. You need to take in the advice wholeheartedly and hear it, but you don't need to become that person necessarily.
Oh, and
I know that's not your intention, but
no, and I agree entirely. Harry Reiser's performance style and my performance style were 180 degrees different.
Right. Sure. Yeah.
What I took from him was the understanding of what magic was supposed to look like.
Yeah.
How I present that is me. So yes, I agree. You take what, but the key is to think about what's being offered.
Yeah.
And figure out if that can be helpful to you.
For sure.
Yeah.
Before we start to wrap up, I do want to ask some very quick questions about.
Oh, I'd like to talk about the ebooks too.
There's an area in that in the wrap up, but
sure.
I wanted to ask very quickly about some advice. I know we don't talk about method very much on this podcast, but a lot of people, working on card stuff, and you seem to be a real expert with a deck of cards. So someone's listening to this, maybe they don't know where to go, they don't know where to start. There's a wealth of information. I know we brushed on like Pharaoh shuffles. I know you do a lot of stack work and things like that. Where should someone go to start learning card magic? There's such a wealth of like information out there. There's so many resources. Do you have sort of a Michael Close stamp of approval?
Yeah, I do. One of the first books I bought was Royal Road to Card Magic, which still has within it routines that you could make a living with.
Yeah.
At a restaurant. One of the early tricks in there, it's called the topsy-turvy cards or something like that.
Yep.
Uses this little thing where the deck straightens itself out.
Yeah.
I learned that early on. I still use it. The exercises in there on overhand shuffling, where you practice without looking at your hands, running a card from the top to the bottom, and then you do a milk shuffle and hold it on the bottom, and then you run it back to the top. I remember sitting in the car on the drive from Fort Wayne back to where we lived in central Indiana, 2.5 hours, and that's all I did was practice that, was learn how to do that. Royal Road, of course, is dated in terms of the methods that are in that book.
Yes.
Because there, of course, were all kinds of developments that came afterward. So right now, my preference is for the Card College books.
So glad you said that.
Well, they're great.
So we're using to hold up this mic, to be honest.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and here's why the Card College books are good. Roberto Giobbi, who I just saw, he was just at the session. We had a nice chat. Hadn't seen him in a while. He's a great student of magic. And more important than him just being a great student, he comes from the Ascanio Tamariz school, and Ascanio and Tamariz come from Vernon. So it is a philosophy of magic that I wholeheartedly endorse in terms of what magic is supposed to look like.
Yeah. He
has excellent handlings for a lot of things. There's some things I think can be done differently. I talk about that actually in the ebook. There's a couple of things that I think there are better ways to do, but that's not quite apples and oranges, but I can defend my position that that this is a little better. But most people buy Card College 1, and that's as far as they get.
Right.
It's just too much for them. It's just too much for them. And that's too bad. I think anybody who actually works their way from front to back on those 5 books and understands what Giobbi's talking about and studies those tricks and works out their own presentation, they're going to be better than 99% of all the magicians out there.
Wholeheartedly agree. And I think it's one of the best things about the book is it is such a great name because it's spot on. It is, if you go through, you are going through like college of cards, and by the time you're done, you are, if you can do everything in the book, you're as good as you need to be with a deck of cards. And I don't mean to like cut off growth for a magician, but everything on that is icing on the cake. Like if you can work through those 5 books, then you're pretty golden.
So here's a card handling tip that will improve the look of your card magic monumentally with this one tip. stop fussing with the cards. And it's for this reason. And working on Penn and Teller has driven this home. We all know the adage that if what you are saying is important, don't move.
Right.
And if what you're doing is important, don't talk.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. Well, the thing about television is television can only take in one piece of information at a time. Okay. And it is that's a much more sensitive thing than watching it live.
Right.
So if you're standing, and there was an act I remember a couple seasons ago, and he had a deck of cards as what was part of the act, but he also had to just talk about things. Mm-hmm. And he was constantly cutting and doing things with the cards. And the problem is, on television, what am I supposed to be focusing on? His words or watching what he's doing with the cards? It can play off in more subtle ways than this, but if you just stand still, it helps. So Card College is my choice for that.
Beautiful, and some good advice for the young magician or the old magician starting and even performing. I think that will make a huge difference. Just think about.
Well, I'll tell you, if you go to michaelclose.com, we have a list of suggested books for the close-up magician. There's a list of suggested books for mentalists. There's a list of suggested books for illusionists, historians, comedy magicians. I didn't do those. I did the one on close-up magic. But, there's enough stuff that will keep you busy for the rest of your life.
Awesome.
And then as you're trying to figure out ways to do things, I always say gravitate toward guys like Tamariz and guys like Tommy Wonder and guys like Vernon. Sure. And that's a big help because they've thought a lot about how do I make it look natural.
Absolutely. So we have a whack of wrap-up questions, and usually we save the plug stuff at the end, but I want to dive in right now.
Okay. I want to hear you talk about here and
talk a little bit about these two brand new ebooks that just came out.
Yeah, they're called The Paradigm Shift, and The Paradigm Shift is actually a move. So it's a title with a double meaning. There's a form of the classic pass that I stumbled into called the Paradigm Shift, which I call the Paradigm Shift. And it actually came about because I misremembered something I'd read by Charlie Miller on the classic pass. Charlie Miller, for a number of years, wrote a column called Magicana in Genie magazine. Mm-hmm. And in one of those, he talked about the classic pass. So I have accumulated, I have a PDF file of all of those columns from Charlie. And that's comes straight from Ask Alexander. It's easy to do. Mm-hmm. Pay your money and find the stuff you want. And they don't get mad at you as long as you just download a couple of things every time you're there and don't get greedy. But it was important to me to have this file of Charlie's stuff.
Yeah.
And so he's talking about the classic pass. And there were 5 main points of his handling that I remembered because I read it and I didn't have a deck of cards in my hand. Mm-hmm. So that a week or two later, I thought, I should play with that thing. What did Charlie say? He said, do this and do this and do this. And I said, wow, I have never seen a shift work like that. That's completely new to me. Mm-hmm. What a clever guy. And then I went back and I saw I'd misread it completely. And it wasn't what Charlie had said at all. And I'd found a different way. So what's interesting about this is most passes, every one that I know of, the pass is accomplished by the fingers being the motivating thing. Usually if you read Erdnase, the left fingers draw off the upper half while the left thumb presses down on the corner of the lower one, and that tilts everything. And then the left fingers pull. Well, in the Paradigm Shift, the fingers only keep the cards from falling on the floor. And everything else is done with the movement of larger body parts. And
wow. Any chance we can see it? We're staring at the cards right now. Perfect.
Can you see it?
Oh, that was good. It didn't even move.
I won't go into it with this deck, but I'll show you. I'll show you after we sign off. I'd be happy to. Yeah. So anyway, that's where the title, The Paradigm Shift, came from.
And by the way, it's a beautiful looking book cover as well.
Well, thank you. One of the things we've tried to do, my wife Lisa and I were not the first people to offer an ebook that combined text and photos and video. That honor goes to library.com, Chris Washuber's company. who put out Card College 1, as a matter of fact, as a PDF with embedded video.
Wow, I didn't know that.
I didn't know that.
Yep. Huh. But that was a pre-existing text that they simply added video clips to. Closely Guarded Secrets was the first ebook that was written from the ground up with the intention of including video.
Right.
And what happens is that changes the way you write. Because there are times when you're going to describe something and you're going to take 2,000 words to do it, whereas if you just say look at this, and that's what happens.
Right.
So, Closely Guarded Secrets came out in 2006, and the next year we adopted my daughter, and then I started editing MUM, which was 65 to 70,000 words a month, and fatigue sets in. I mean, as I say. As far as how much you get done, life takes first dibs.
Yeah.
And whatever crumbs are left is however much you get done. And so we'd work on it, and then we'd lose enthusiasm, and then we'd try to figure out how we were going to put it out and what have you. So what we finally came up with, now that it's done, there's over 60 chapters.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's a lot of work.
There's material from me. There's things from Bob Farmer, the great Canadian guy. He and I collaborate on things, and we just have the best time. Most of the stuff that's in there that's Bob's, I've just added I sand off a few corners, but I sand them off in such a way that they end up fooling Bob. I mean, that's one of my favorite things, is that he says to me, you do these things and then you fool me with my own trick. So there's a bunch of his stuff in there. There's stuff about what I call chaos, repose, and action, which is a way of looking at how you get into a sleight. Mm-hmm. And I've had people I talked to. I was at the workshop convention in St. Joe, Missouri, with a fella, and I was telling him how this theory worked. And he said he went home and it has transformed the way he does magic. Wow. It has transformed the way he does magic. There's a whole chapter about Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, which has a beautiful explanation of how the two systems of the brain work. Okay. And it is, I believe, the single most valuable information for magicians, although he isn't applying it to magic, he's applying it to economics. Yeah. But I think that if you think about how the brain works, it changes completely the way that you structure magic. And it's between the chaos, action, and repose and the two systems. Those are the overarching pathways that it's in every single routine that's in there. There's stuff that's almost self-working. There's stuff that will require some serious work. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But all of them are practical. All of them are commercial. All of them have presentations that I believe are fresh, that you will read and go, well, I've never heard anybody do that trick, do that kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. I have some work on Aaron Fisher's Gravity Half Pass, which is a beautiful move. Yeah. So there's all kinds of things like that. I'm really glad it's done. It feels
that's a sign of something that you gave your whole heart to. And
yes, it's been, I've been thinking about it for a long, long time. There's an Aronson stack trick in there called the End Game, which occurred to me literally as I slept one night. I woke up about 12:30 in the morning, sat up straight in bed and went, holy shit. And my wife said, are you okay? I said, I'll be back. And I ran down to the basement where our offices are, and I grabbed a deck of cards and I put it in Aronson order, and I did what had occurred to me in the dream, and it all worked. And I went, wow. And it's really something. It is unfortunately stack dependent.
Okay.
Right.
I've tried to make it work with Tamara's, and it doesn't easily. It has to do with the fact that it works because of the things that Simon had built into the stack.
Right.
Yeah. Because he built those poker deals in there, those cards come out in a very fortuitous way as the procedure of this trick unfolds. And it's just something that I believe is as strong. Everybody touts the Tamara's stack because you can get back to new deck order, and that can be the big finish of your mem deck set. Mm-hmm. I believe this is as equally as amazing.
Wow.
I demoed it for a bunch of guys at the session in London earlier this month, and they just couldn't believe what you got out of the whole thing. It's really something. So I think the material is, my hope is, I mentioned in the shut that goddamn dog up. Sorry, I lost my cool. The kind of book I like, and I write about this in the final chapter of the book. I like books that are deep and dense. Mm-hmm. I like a book that you can come back to a year or two later, mm-hmm. which has not changed, and yet you find in it stuff that did not relate to you when you were there the first time. Yeah. And the book hasn't changed, but you have. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And I love books like that. And there's books in my life that have magic books and non-magic books where I go back and I went, how did I not see that the first time? Yeah. So that's, as I wrote these, it was with the hope that they would be that kind of a book. And there would be just joyful surprises when you went back after a while and you went, well, how did I miss that? Holy smoke. So, but my main hope is that they're useful. I really want them to be useful books, which is why we did it the way we did it. Not as a printed book, but a book that, you can carry around with you wherever you are, put it on your tablet, and boom, it's right there.
Great. You watch it on the subway, or read it, when you're on a trip or something like that.
I think, it's very important to highlight what an educational tool having embedded photos and videos for, not just for people with different learning styles, but for everybody, like to be able to get an actual picture or video of what the move's supposed to look like versus maybe misinterpreting it.
Absolutely. Right? I'm not a big fan of video as a learning tool to the extent that there are times when video is absolutely the best way. I don't know if rope magic should be taught through a book. Objects moving through three-dimensional space are very hard to describe in print. Yeah. Video is perfect at. But there is something really helpful to you and your brain if you have to process my thoughts through your brain without me sitting next to you saying, no, that's not right. Right. It's good for your brain. And it makes you a better human being. It makes you a better magician.
Philosophical text,
it is.
You read through it once, and you're like, oh, I think I get it. You read through it again, you're like, no, I didn't get it the first time. Now I get it. And then you read through a few weeks later, you go, what was I talking about?
And look, if I had watched a video of Charlie Miller explaining how to do the pass, I would have never misremembered what I did by reading it.
And the book would never exist.
And then the book wouldn't exist the way it did. Right. I mean, a friend of mine named Rich Meyer from California misread the last moment of a routine of mine called Dr. Strange Trick, which is a card warp routine. And by getting it wrong, came up with something infinitely better than what I had come up with. It is the most astonishing moment of any card warp routine because it's the standard tear down the middle, but the card changes for 3/4 of its length. Oh, wow. And it's all an optical illusion. And it's the damnedest thing you've ever seen. And so there's these happy accidents that would never happen if you were learning it over video. So.
That's awesome. We have a few different wrap-up questions.
Sure. Shoot.
The first is what we like to call a magical PSA. So you have all the magicians of the world listening right now, and you have some sort of word of warning, thing that they should stop doing or start doing, a general PSA for the magicians that you want to tell them. So what is it that you want to tell the magicians of the world?
Here's what I think the magicians of the world need to think about. If you see somebody do a trick on television and there's elements in it that you've never seen before, leave it alone. It's not yours. Just because you see it on television, it's not yours. If it's not for sale, if it's not being offered in a book, leave it alone. It's not yours.
Amazing.
That's what I suggest. Is that hard to do sometimes? Of course it is.
It's in our nature to...
Well, and the problem is this. Look, here's the thing about the title of magician. You cannot give yourself that title. You cannot simply announce to the world, I am a magician, because you've read this book and practiced this trick. The only people who can give you that title are the people you perform for.
Right.
If you are a magician, then they are the ones to make that determination, not you. So, with that in mind, do not think that buying a thing makes you a magician and will be the solution to this will be the trick that makes me a magician. Mm-hmm. It won't. And long ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, when I first worked my first magic convention, I discovered, sadly, that if you are doing something in front of magicians, the only thing you should do is what you're selling. If you do anything else, that's gone. That will go away and will be appropriated.
Wow.
Simply because that's the way magicians do it. And sadly, look, this is not a new development.
Yeah.
Look about the sawing in half illusion and how the great venerable magicians who we honor and adore, they were rip-off artists.
Yeah.
So it's sad and it happens. But if you see it, for example, I praised Eric Mead's performance of Conover's Coins and Cylinder. And I wrote it up on my blog at my website about the things that he did that are really actually the bare minimum of what we should do. People expect a great effect. They expect an interesting presentation. They expect beautiful handling. Mm-hmm. And what was the result of Eric's performance? All the guys who make gaffed coins got overloaded with people going, can I get a set of those coins to do that trick? Well, that's idiocy.
Yeah.
Just because you saw Eric do it, now everybody wants to do it. Yeah. The trick's been out there for 60 years.
Yeah.
Yep.
But, I saw that guy do it. I gotta do that because I saw that guy do it. No, put it away.
Yeah.
Put it away. A lot of times when the hot new trick comes out, I'd get one just so I had it. I'd put it in a drawer and I wouldn't touch it for 5 years.
Yeah.
Then everybody forgets it. Now it's time to take it out.
Yeah.
See what's going on.
I was cleaning up my room at my mom's place with my partner, and she was just like grabbing random magic props and asking me about them, and I wasn't telling her what they do, but I was showing her the tricks. And there's these things that, I mean, she's seen me do magic for quite a while, so she doesn't really react that much anymore because, anyway, I was using old gimmicks, and her mind was being blown. She was having such a great time, and I thought, man, why did I put these, in this drawer? Like, what was I doing then? But at the time, they weren't, useful to me.
What happens is we get bored with what we own. We're looking to amuse ourselves.
Sure, exactly.
But stay away from it. Find your own thing.
Awesome. So we do what's called the endless chain of magicians portion of this. So in order to keep the podcast going forever, we get each guest to recommend someone we should talk to in the future. Don't feel bad if you have no idea who we've already interviewed, but if you could just name names, and when we have a new one, that will be great.
And the caveat is we have to be able to get in contact with them. So no Penn and Teller unless you can do it.
Yeah.
Well, John Carney's coming to town in February.
It's a beautiful one.
Amazing.
Of all of the people who were students of Vernon, Carney is one of the younger ones of those. He's in his late 50s now, and he certainly has internalized and adopted Vernon's dictums about natural handling and things like that. Yeah. He would be a fabulous guest, and he's funny and he knows everything, and John's an old friend. So that would be somebody that you should get.
Awesome.
Bob Farmer probably won't talk to you, and for good reason. Excuse me, but Bob is fascinating, and Bob's a brilliant guy.
Yeah, we can try.
I have a list on my refrigerator of people never to screw around with, and he's top of the list. He's a smart magic lawyer. Don't mess with him.
One of the other segments is a question of the week. So you've got all the magicians of the world to either answer a question because you want to hear what they all think, or sort of ask a question that they should all be asking themselves. But what question do all the magicians need to hear this week?
Well, this week, I think the question to ask is to look at whatever routine you're doing and ask the question, why should anyone care?
Beautiful.
Awesome. Why should anyone else care?
Beautiful.
I don't want to see a puzzle. I don't want to see how good you think you are. I want to know why I should even be watching this. Mm-hmm. And if you can't answer that question, then you have to sort of think about what you're doing. But
beautiful.
I'm very much at this stage in my life interested in the non-ego driven performance.
For sure.
100%.
It's very hard to do. And as my old friend Max Maven has said, that it seems that your success as a magician depends in a great deal how much you're able to get over whatever it was that got you into magic in the first place.
Right.
For many, as young men, it's a way to counteract social inadequacies.
Mm-hmm.
Look at me, look at me, look at me. And magic is the perfect thing for that. Look at me, look at me. I have a whole chapter in the ebook about asking the question, who has the power? And it mainly addresses both the social problems and the people who don't like to be fooled with magic problems when you're doing strolling magic and things like that. And it came about, actually, and this was a happy thing for me, because Josh Jay disagreed with an essay I wrote in one of the early worker books about the big lie that it's not fun to be fooled.
Right.
And he was correct in calling me on it, because there were a couple of errors that I made that I needed to clarify, which I did. And so I think we're all happy with the state of it. But you got to figure out, how can I share what I can do as a gift?
Love it.
That's the question to ask.
Love it.
This is a gift, because, we need the reminder that there are astonishing things, and there are astonishing things that we will never know the answer to. Mm-hmm. You will live, you will die, you will never know the answer to it. That doesn't mean they can't be beautiful things, and it doesn't mean you can't be happy in the not knowing.
For sure.
But so there it is. So that's sort of where my head is as far as that and the sponge ding dong.
Yeah. Ask your question. Ask yourself about the sponge.
No. That's not right.
We have one more thing before we get to the final wrap up, which is a question that we're reinstating recently, which is what is one thing in the 2018-2019 magic space that you dislike, and one thing in the 2018-2019 magic space that you do like?
I'll start with what I do like. I do like guys like Derek Delgadio, who are taking what we would normally call a magic show and couching it in a way that makes it much more than a magic show.
For sure.
That gives it, and once again, it gives it context. It answers the question beautifully, why should I care?
Yep.
And now you know why you should care.
Yeah.
By the time you get out of that. That's why you should care. What could there be less of? Magic products. There could be less magic products. I'm real tired. I mean, real tired of guys putting out material that was invented before they were even on the planet.
Yeah.
Because they are simply not doing due diligence. I had a problem with one of my effects showing up like that. And then another friend is running into the same problem. They simply are reinventing these things and just churning it out there. It's like there's so much product coming out now. I don't know how anything gets the legs to become a classic product, because it's being sold like Kleenex now.
Yeah.
The shelf life is less than 45 days.
Yeah. It says like the next big thing is magic.
Exactly.
And it's like for the next 45 seconds, sure.
Exactly.
And then we'll move on.
It's so much better. I mean, it's such a cliched thing now. The old David Devant, how many tricks do you know? Well, I think maybe I know 6. And there is something to staying with an effect for years and finding everything that there is to find out about it, and to be so comfortable with your performance of it that you disappear more or less, and just the purity of this thing remains. And that only happens over time. And it certainly doesn't happen if every 3 days you have to order something, a new download, and see what's. Of course, when I'm saying all this doesn't apply to my new downloads,
which you should all get,
because it'll make you a magician, unlike other things which don't make you a magician.
So the next is sort of our favorite part. We each go around and highlight one thing from the episode that we thought was particularly interesting or valuable. I'll start. I really enjoyed. It's a very small part and it's a very simple concept, but the idea of what's point A, what's point B, and does the middle allow for those two things to happen? And it shouldn't, but also not only that, but the middle should make sense. You should have a reason that you're doing it. It should be easy to follow. It should be logical. The only time is once you're at point B, you've experienced magic. Jonah, what about you?
I would say one of my favorite parts, one of the ones that I want to highlight for people who, they've been listening to this for like an hour, they're maybe walking their dog or something. I want to just drive home a lot of the information that you were talking about in terms of how to make your trick better. Like we've heard it a quadrillion times, but you need to script your magic. You need to think about why you're doing what you're doing. You need to think about why people should care. Like it's the basics, but also driving home those points are the sort of things that any good magic teacher is going to ask you anytime you do the effect, anywhere, anyhow. And just a good thing, you now have those tools. You can ask them to yourself, so you can start making your tricks and your performances better right away. And Michael, what do you think one of the most important parts of this effect? Aside from buying the book,
I'm embarrassed to say I wasn't listening. I really have no idea. I was hoping you'd have a better guest on. But here I am. I don't know that I had anything like that, but let me instead offer a couple things that tie into yours. Jeff Pinsky in August of 2017 asked me to do a theory-only lecture at the Browser's Den of Magic here in Toronto. And I did. It was 3.5 hours long. Nobody left, which was extraordinary. And a couple things came out of that, and let me just use these as maybe perhaps parting suggestions. One of the important things that you have to do to guide yourself, if you're trying to self-guide yourself on this path, is to say, what is my definition of magic? And write it down. Figure it out. Because you don't know what it is you're trying to accomplish until you've done that. And then, number two, as far as the presentational side of magic goes, Alex Elmsley wrote about this. He had a thing called the automatic producer. And basically, he boiled it down to two questions as you look at your routine that you're working on. Number one, can everyone understand the effect? That's the first thing you have to ask yourself. If when you finish, you said to somebody, what just happened? They would say, well, I mean, imagine somebody trying to tell you what the effect of rollover aces is. What was the effect? Well, there were royal flushes at the end. and I don't remember how they got there.
Yeah.
And then you shuffled the cards. Maybe you shuffled them face up. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
What was the effect? And the other question to ask is something interesting happening all the time? Now, two simple questions. You answer those positively with good answers, you've improved your routine.
For sure.
So it's those kind of questions that you, if you absolutely want to try to do it on your own, those are good things to suggest.
I love it. And with that, we wrap up the episode. Thank you, Michael, so much for coming to join us on the episode and chatting.
Do you guys validate? Because I'm in a parking garage.
No, I can stamp it, but I don't know what kind of thing I got.
Nuts. What a cheap show.
And of course, big thank you to everybody at home who tuned in to the episode. Love the magic, and hopefully that you guys have now tangible tools to make your performances and your acts better.
They could always go to michaelclose.com.
Is there a slash, or it'll be big
slash.
on the michaelclose.com, and you can find the book. We were looking at it at the he brought a little ebook, and we were looking at it, and it is absolutely beautiful. So take a look at the Paradigm Shift, and we'll see you all next Thursday.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Well, there you have it, 99, a final double-digiter, an in-person episode, everything you want, all banded together in one, a real beauty, and I got one thing to ask you. Can you please share it with the world? Now's the time that you look at yourself and you look at all that we've given you here at the Discourse and Magic podcast, and you're like, wow, I've listened to like 30 episodes and I've never told a soul about it. Well, now's the time to tell a soul. Now's the time to give me your thanks by way of sharing it with the world and getting even just one more person to be a fan or be a part of this podcast. It would really mean the world. So thank you so much for all of your help in our double-digit episodes. I hope you learned a boatload in the first 99, and I think you're going to learn a boatload in the next 99. Thank y'all so much, and I'll see you at episode 100. I'm not a singer.